I remember the first time I met you, and we were at this like Zoom event because the middle of COVID.
Yeah.
And I remember, like, to me, the biggest thing that struck me was what you guys can see right now. If you see this, which is like she had all her books in color rank order. And there was something about energy of the room that you were sitting in that I was like really drawn to. Like, this is very fascinating. I've never thought about making my books done by color. It's beautiful. And you told me how people comment on it all the time. And I thought, how fascinating, right? Because I spent my life as a merchant dealing with space and creating stories and whatever. And so I know I like color and print and pattern and am impacted by that. But that was the biggest thing I remember taking away, which is kind of a funny thing. Think about it now.
Yeah.
I actually redid all of mine in color afterwards. I remember just thinking, oh, what a lovely lady. I love what she's doing. And I love her mission. Like that is what I remember from that conversation. And then fast forward to, was it January of 22? You and I end up at an event and get to meet in person. And we had a lovely conversation. I was a little under the weather, but I had a lovely conversation. It was great. I thought it was so nice to meet her in person. And it wasn't until we met back up in April that something shifted in a way that was, again, almost inexplicable. And I can't even remember the moment it happened, but it was as if you and I had known each other our whole lives. I mean, I think we probably talked well over 12 hours, just the two of us that weekend, up till 1 a.m, sharing stories with you that I think I haven't shared with most people in my life. And I felt this immediate sense of what you're doing right now has significant impact. Like what you're doing right now is creating the foundation of something really, really big. And I remember explaining that to you because it was so evident to me, like, don't you see what's happening here? And the funniest part about it is I still didn't fully see it. I just knew there was something big here, but it was in the weeks that followed, the conversations that we had, the discussions we had, that it became so apparent that our value systems, our perspectives, the impact that we wanted to make was so intertwined. And that a lot of the things that I've been seeing in the last 5 years in helping women, I would see gaps on what they needed after they were working with me. And it was always dealing with, like, how do I deal with my family and creating more peace and mindfulness in my home? And I think also through the process and my personal journey, right? Once we learn these things, when we start trying to figure out how do we help our husband? How do we help our kids? How do we set them up? And I just saw such a beautiful synergy of like, well, that's the work you're doing. And it just makes so much sense. And it's been such a beautiful journey since then of like complete synchronicities, things showing up that make it so evident that this is the right path in a way that like I could have never envisioned. I've read often, I watched the movie. Have you seen the movie You Can Only Imagine?
The documentary
about, the song I Could Only Imagine. And one of the things I really loved about that is at the end of the movie, he goes through this horrible experience. If you guys haven't watched it, a horrible experience with an abusive father. His mom abandons him. And essentially at the end of the movie, his dad ends up actually giving his life to God, becoming a spiritual man and dying. And at the funeral, the grandmother says, I can only imagine what he sees. And something sparks for Bart, I think is the guy who wrote it. And he goes back through decades of his journal, and it has said, I can only imagine over and over and over and over again in his journal. And it was sitting there the whole time until the moment that it was meant to come. And then when that came, he literally sat down and wrote that story. And I can't remember the statistics, but it's like one of the best-selling songs of all time, completely launched this whole career for him. And I've heard that many times, especially in the musician space, where like a song, they wrote it, it was an inspiration, they knew it and wrote it. And then it became the thing that became so, they became so famous for. It was just this immediate thing. And that's sort of how I have felt about our experience in this journey so far.
Yeah, absolutely. When I knew of you, because you've been highly respected and regarded, and so your name comes up a lot in the network and in those circles. And so I remember that Zoom call. And I think what's interesting is like, in a lot of ways, we do very similar things. You have this keen ability to hone in on, to cut through the fluff and hone in for people exactly what the root cause is, or like, not the Band-Aid, like let's fix this problem, issue, challenge, whatever it is. And I think part of my journey too, and the gift that I can bring is the space, because you're not the first person that says, I've told you things that I haven't told anybody else, even people that are closest to me, and we've just met kind of thing. So I always get people saying something about my energy. And so much of what I experience experience, like to your point, what you were saying, like we don't always have words for things. And so for those listening that don't know, because I haven't mentioned it, is that I have a mindfulness-based preschool that I started, 13 years ago. But what you were saying about like these experiences, I never wanted a school. I never set out, to have a school, but there are just things you keep doing. So I joked that like the school found me, and all I did was listen and follow the breadcrumbs or just continue. There wasn't actually a whole lot of thought about it. Oh, you said something about like our meeting and the way this whole thing is evolving is like you couldn't have planned it.
Never.
And it wouldn't have been as good if you did plan it out and had some like, okay, I'm going to do this and I'm going to do that. And it was the same thing with the school, is like it just evolved into this thing and there wasn't a lot of thought. And so I think a big part of our community too is to help support people in that journey of like, I always use the word like, how do you allow? It's the allowing of things to emerge. And the human side of us wants to plan, and it's like, I'm going to start a business. I'm going to open a school. So if I open a school, then I have to do this, 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 and this. I didn't know how to open a school. I had a business background, but I had, no idea. And, they say the universe, God, whoever is there to support you if you're open to it. And there's always a net to fall on. And you just might not know what that is, or you might have some fear around like how far down is that net. But there's, trust came up in our conversation. There's a level of trust both in the kind of the collective and then a trust in self too. And that's a really huge part of, I would say, right, the journey for both of us is like just trusting ourselves.
For sure. And I think also to your point, the extremes, I think we think it's one or the other, but what I have really come to learn again, and we have several mutual mentors, which I think is also a beautiful thing that makes it, there's so much synergy there, but is that there actually is a method. It's not just a trust and let go. There's a method to be able to actually achieve your goals and being able to learn, like riding a bike, what that looks and feels like, and having that support and being able to figure out and learn that is really important. And again, this is a place where I think people go to extremes and then they're not successful. They think, oh, these people are like, oh, just trust and let it go. No, That's not just it, but it's also not micromanage and plan everything out. There's a beautiful place in the middle. And in the middle where that gray lies is where actually the synchronicity, the opportunities, the ease, the flow, the expansiveness of your life actually belongs.